Test, test. Test, you guys hear me okay? All right.
Test, test. Hey, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the combined Auditorium Bible class. So good to see each and every one of you here this morning. Hope you all are doing well. I'm so excited to be able to introduce our guest speaker. Dave Blanchard joins us from Colorado Springs, Colorado. A little bit more beautiful than Houston, Texas, but I'm excited to get to introduce him. I'm excited for you to get to hear him. We enjoyed an awesome couple of sessions yesterday with the Generation Summit, and that will be continued following our catered meal, which I hope you all will join us for this afternoon. But Dave Blanchard has a doctorate in ministry from Fuller Seminary and an MDiv from Abilene Christian. He's served the church and academy for over 20 years, specializing in youth and congregational ministries. He's blessed by an amazing wife and 3 incredible kids. I love this in his bio. I don't know that he knew that I was going to say this, but Dave is occasionally a guest speaker when better and more popular speakers are unavailable, which I think you all will realize is not the case for Dave. He's great. So, Dave, take it away.
Thanks, Joseph. You guys hear me okay? Yeah, I was challenged by a friend of mine when I wrote my book recently. He said, you need to take that out of your bio, that part about better speakers out there. That doesn't represent you well. I said, well, that's exactly the kind of people I want to meet, is people that are going to laugh at that. And it is kind of how that's true. So, at any rate, Joseph, thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate you guys being here today. I've really enjoyed my time with your church. Yesterday, we did 2 sessions over in your family center. We talked about young people, the developmental challenges of being a young person, particularly in our culture today. And then we're beginning to shift gears into what do we do as a church to most effectively engage our young people. I'm assuming that most of us would say the long-term goal of ministry with future generations is that we want them to know Jesus. We want them to be saved, to be right with the Lord. We want them to develop an identity that is firmly rooted in Christ. We want to see the church be vibrant and to continue for generations to come to the glory of God. Everybody pretty well agree with that? I'm assuming that we're there. Okay, good. So I really time and money into a weekend like this where we can really focus on some of those questions about what do we do in ministry toward that end? Why do we do the things we do, particularly with our young people? And how can we do those things most effectively to actually work toward that achieved goal? Are people right with Jesus? Identity in the Lord. We're all going to heaven together. So today, for this little bit, I'm going to ask you in just a moment. It may be a little uncomfortable. I've spoken with your leaders, okay? Don't give them a hard time. If this isn't your favorite, you can blame me. But I thought, this is such a unique opportunity to have a combined class session where we've got multiple generations in the same room. I'm going to use this time to do something a little bit different. So, this will not be a traditional Bible class, all right? What I'd like to do for the next several minutes is facilitate some discussion, all right? So in just a moment, if you're comfortable to do so, if you're able to do so, I would love, when I say go, for everybody to just kind of get up and maybe move around the room a little bit. Here would be the perfect situation. We're going to process a half a dozen questions today in discussion groups. I'll facilitate from up here, but the value of all this will be the discussion you have with the people around you. An ideal situation would be a small group in which you have multiple generations represented. I'd love to have a teenage members of a young married age group. I know how we tend to do life. We've got our friends, we've got our people. They typically are the same age and they look just like us, and that's who we talk to, that's who we sit with. So, like I said, if you are able, get up in just a moment, move around, and find some people to talk to. If you're not able, that's okay. If it makes you uncomfortable, also okay. Be sure you're at least seated where you've got a couple of other people that you can speak with. All right, this is not an individual exercise. So, make sense? Divide it up by generations. Maybe sit with some of you don't know. Go, and we'll get started here in just a moment.
Either everybody's my age or
I see a lot more older folks in here today.
oh yeah,
We need to sprinkle in some.
that's the problem.
That is a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly why we're having this workshop.
Our young people, our teenagers, is very shallow out of this church.
Okay.
You want me to move this out of your way, or do you want to?
This is perfect right here.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Here. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Good. Glad
Brought
to
the
see
cool
you.
weather with you.
Oh, yeah. You're welcome. All right. Already, this is great. I love to hear the conversation. We're off to a really good start here. If you manage to find a group of people to sit with where there's somebody who is not your age, and maybe someone you don't know that well, then already we've had a successful exercise. We're off to a really good start here. And I can make the case that a lot of what we want to do as a people within the church doesn't always have to be as structured and formal as we think it does. There's value in just sitting down with somebody you don't know and having a conversation. I loved hearing the dialogue and seeing how willing everybody was to move around the room. All these are very good, healthy things for a church. All right, so we're off to a great start. Up on your screen, just briefly, I wrote a little book recently. I've got some with me today. If it's anything you're interested in, you can see me later. If you scan the code online, they're a little more expensive. I can sell you mine cheaper. So if you want one, otherwise, whatever. All right, let's move on to this. So the workshop this weekend is entitled "Oh," kind of a weird word. We'll unpack that maybe a little bit more at lunch, okay? But for the purposes of this time, I want to use our time optimally, so I'm not going to get into all the details of the workshop. We're going to focus more on just having some discussion here today. All right, so 3 things that I've been trying to emphasize throughout our conversations this weekend, so I'm going to bring them up here today. As it pertains to ministry in the church, ministry with all our people at all our ages, but particularly in the way we do ministry with our young people, since that's what we're talking about this weekend. 3 points to put in the back of your mind. What we do matters. How we use our resources, how we use our time, it matters in ministry. Number 2, why we do what we do matters. It's not good enough that we do the same things we've always done just because we've always done them. We sometimes need to step back and ask ourselves again, now why are we doing this again? We may continue to do the same old thing forever, and that's okay. But let's at least understand why, because that matters. Thirdly, how we do what we do matters. And again, talking to ministry with young people, how do we most effectively engage our young people and help stimulate their spiritual development toward a faith that's going to stick beyond high school, where we have future generations of Christ followers. What we do matters. Why we do matters. How we do matters. Okay, so briefly, and you may have already done this, let's take just maybe 60 seconds within your group. If there's people in your group that you don't know, maybe just real quick. My name is such and such. A fact about yourself. Go around the circle, and then we'll get into deeper issues. Okay? Make sense? Go. Just a few more seconds. If you haven't introduced yourself by now, you got to do it. We're getting ready to move on. Boy, that quieted everybody down really fast. Sorry, that's okay. The hardest part of an exercise like this, especially when you see people talking and smiling and interacting, is like, how do I say we've got to stop and move on? Let's just do this. This is great. Okay, so we're off to a good start. By a show of hands, we're going to see how well we divided up the room a minute ago. By a show of hands, how many of you just met someone that maybe you haven't known or spoken with in the past? Anybody? Oh, great. Look at this. Okay, wonderful. That is awesome. It's always amazing to me that we can be a part of the same church family, sometimes for months and even years, and we can recognize a face from across the auditorium, but we've never actually had a conversation. So we assemble together, but if we were to ask how well do we know each other, sometimes not as well as we could. Isn't that fascinating? So there's value in just what we did just here today. Just there. There's value in that. All right, well, let's take it to another level. All right, so again, the focus of our workshop this weekend is about ministry with young people. Okay? And in ministering to young people, yesterday we unpacked a couple words just to understand the semantics. So we have a word that's adolescence. Adolescence refers to a certain period of life in our life stages. Within adolescence, there is a subset that is the teenage years. All right, so I'm kind of using these two words interchangeably, but I want to make sure we understand the difference. Adolescence is a concept that's only been around for a little over 100 years, and at the time that the word was coined, the idea is that adolescence begins with the sexual development of the youngest people in a given culture, and then it ends whenever that culture has determined that person is a fully independent and functional adult. In 1904, when the word adolescence was coined, The duration of adolescence in our culture began at about 14 and a half years old and ended at age 16. Year and a half from when we started maturing sexually as young people to when we became fully productive and competent members of adult society. Today, our young people can begin developing sexually, biologically, as early as 8 or 9 years old. Believe it or not. And in terms of what our culture has determined for adulthood, when does someone become adult? If we want to talk about simply when is the human brain at its fullest maturity, we're talking about the mid to late 20s oftentimes. So this word adolescence, 100 years ago, it referred to a stage of life that was about a year and a half long. Today, adolescence can last from elementary school till after college, a span of 15 to 20 years. We refer to this as extended adolescence. So within this span, in the very middle, think of it as roughly your junior high years, your high school years, college or whatever that is, and a little beyond. That's adolescence. Right in the middle is the teenage years. We all remember our teenage years, for good or for bad, right? So the next question for you to discuss in your group is, who were you, or for those of you who are still teenagers, who are you as a teenager? I'm intentionally leaving that question fairly broad, so there's room for interpretation. But just think back to your teenage years and share with your group for just a couple minutes, who were or are you as a teenager? Okay? Go.
Did you ever, you've heard James Dobson, right?
I know of
The
James
family
Dobson, yes.
counselor. He said that the adolescent, like baby, toddler, a child, and then adolescent. Then adolescent were all the way up to before you become a teenager at the age of 18.
And beyond.
And that adolescent, like kids nowadays, if they are 12, 13, 14, the parent says, I already have a teenager, and I'm thinking about what James Dobson spoke about. No, you're not. You have a child still at home.
They're interchanging the words.
Yeah. And they said, I have 3 teenagers, a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old.
Oh, understand.
Yeah, and James Dobson classified them as adolescents.
Yes, that's right.
And then teenager is as you get older, like 18, 19, 20, and all that.
Yes, that's right. Sounds like that family confused the
But
terms.
a lot of families here say, I have a teenager.
Oh, we do that all the time.
How old are you? Oh, she's 12, 13, I have a teenager.
We do that a lot. I think we interchange those terms.
Well, adolescent sounds better.
Adolescent is
18 months, 100 years ago, and now 12 years.
Oh, way different.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, very different. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Take 30 more seconds. Take about 30 more seconds on this question.
Colorado Springs?
What's the name?
Eddie and Misty Boyles.
I don't think so. Not yet.
I was just curious. I don't know where they go to church. But.
No, I don't think so. And they might sit in front of me every Sunday. We're still new enough that we're learning ourselves. Yeah. Okay, we're going to transition to another question. Now, if we had unlimited time today and we could just do this and not worry about our schedule, this is typically the part where I'd love to just walk around and ask for some feedback from your groups so we could learn what your groups discussed. For the sake of moving through these questions today, we're just going to keep going. I think the value today will be in your group and in that discussion. So I'm just going to keep feeding these to you. We're going to keep it moving. Interesting. Like I said, I left this question open-ended so that you could interpret it however you like. Who were you as a teenager? Some of the things you may have discussed in your group was about where you found your sense of community. Who were you people? Were you a jock or a nerd or a band kid or an art student or a performer? Or some of us think of our teenage years in that way. Maybe it had to do with where you lived. Maybe it was about gender or ethnicity. All these things are equally valid. All things in our teenage years that we're trying to sort out, all these things are kind of swirling around us. And we're trying to nail down saying, who am I in the midst of all of this? And so often, even in our adult years, when we speak about our identity, we tend to point to those things that describe who we are as people. But we do well, particularly in identity formation, to really dig deeper and consider what it is that defines us as a person. So I can be described in my high school years as a tennis player who works at a grocery store. I'm an older brother. I'm a son. I live in a white middle-class family in the suburbs. All those things were pretty well true of me. Those all described pieces of who I was. But ultimately, none of those things define me for a lifetime. We need Jesus to define us for a lifetime. That's part of our challenge in working with our young people, is how do we cultivate that sense of identity that cuts through the things that describe us to get to the core of what actually defines us. Okay, here's the next question. All right, so this is going to follow up on the last question. Share a little bit, again, this will be in your groups, share a little bit about the world of your teenage years. So at the time you were a teenager, it can really be anything. Think about those years. What were some of the defining factors? I've offered a few on the screen just to kind of be prompts to get you thinking, but what's the state of the world, entertainment, sports? What was it maybe that kind of, I don't know, defined, I want to use that word again, but defined your generation and the things that were good and bad about growing up as a teenager when you did, all right? It's a little deeper. Let's take just a couple minutes with your groups. Go. Take about 30 more seconds, 30 seconds, 30 more seconds. Test, test. Okay. My assumption would be, again, if we could just process that question for about an hour in our groups, there's a lot we could learn from one another. Similarities among generations, right? The assumptions on the slide itself, there are certain things that are consistent from one generation to the next, particularly in our teenage years. For our lifetime, everybody in this room, in one way or another, in the teenage years, this is kind of that in-between, between childhood and adulthood. So we experience some kind of transition, whether that's rites of passage or empowerment. We're seeking to find our own sense of autonomy, or where do I find power? How do I understand that my decisions affect other people? But by and large, we also find ourselves without as much power as people who are older than us, people who control the institutions of the land, who have the money, or today, if we're speaking to our young people, it would be those people who've paid off their student loans, or they are able to afford a house. That would be different. How do you feel about those concepts as a teenager today versus even when I was a teenager? Some of these things have changed over time. I'm guessing that in many of our groups, when we think about our teenage years, there may have been some kind of domestic or global conflict that had some kind of impact when we think back. For some people, it's assassinations, Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy, or for my generation, it would have been more the Oklahoma City bombing, or even a little more recently, 9/11, which we've experienced. There are people in this room, and I won't point them out, but there are people in this room who weren't alive when 9/11 occurred. Right? Think about that. There are people who don't know what it's like to be able to walk into an airport and walk in without all the security and just walk right up to the gate and meet people who are coming to visit you for the weekend. My age and older, we remember a time like that. And really, that wasn't that long ago. But how quickly things change, how quickly our culture has changed. Think about pronoun usage and how all of a sudden that's so important in our culture just within the last 5 to 10 years. When were we ever talking about that before? Now, that doesn't mean that that's something we scoff at and throw out the window. It means that there are developments in our culture for today's teenagers that for a lot of us don't make sense. It's confusing, it's head-scratching, it's maddening. But if we're going to have any chance at connecting with our young people and getting to know them and understand where they come from, it also means there's a lot for us to try to understand about things that are happening all around us that don't appear to make any sense on the surface. And some of the best people to ask about those things would be our young people. Let's find out about the world we live in. Let's talk to them about why these things matter. There's always something we could stand to learn. Okay, here's the next question. Let's shift gears now to more of a spiritual conversation. Think about your own spiritual development. Who and what contributed most to your faith development as a young person? This is a fascinating question for me. All right? Who and what contributed most to your faith development as a young person? Okay? Discuss. Take 30 more seconds. 30 more seconds. Okay. The question was, who and what contributed most, keyword most, to your faith development as a young person? No wrong answers, all right? No wrong answers here, but I'm looking for, I'm going to sound like a game show host. I'm looking for the number one answer on the board. What was the, in your groups, think about the, or even just for you individually, all right? The number one answer that comes to your mind when I ask this question, I'm curious by a show of hands, how many of you said the thing that contributed most to your faith development as a young person was church camp? Show of hands. We got a few, okay. How many said Sunday school? Sunday school. How many of you said the number one contributor was Sunday school? We've got just a few, okay. Vacation Bible School. How many of you said that was the number one thing that contributed to my spiritual development? Vacation Bible School. Okay, so we got a couple of those too. How many of you said it was a minister, your youth minister, let's say, contributed to your spiritual development more than anything else? We've got a handful. What about a preacher? Got a handful here. How many of you said a parent? Look, keep the hands up. Keep them up. If you're paying attention a minute ago, think about all the things that we just discussed. Thank you. No wrong answers to that question. I'm thankful for whatever got you to Jesus and that you're here today. I don't even care. I'm just glad it happened. But isn't that a fascinating exercise? These things that what we do matters, why we do matters, how we do matters. If we unpack some of the things we do as a church, and I'm not just talking about your church, I'm saying walk into any church in town and unpack what we're doing in our churches today in the name of leading our kids to Jesus. Think about the hands you just saw come up in the room. Was it VBS? It was for a few. Was it camp? It was for a few. Was it your youth minister or your preacher? It was for a few. Was it a parent? Okay, what we do in ministry matters, why we do it matters, how we do it matters. I told the group yesterday that part of my work this weekend is hopefully to just prompt some conversation. Right? I'm not here to answer these questions. I don't know what ministry looks like for this church necessarily. But my hope is that through exercises like this morning, if we can just put some questions on the table, share some exercises together, then long after I'm gone, the task of this church family is to continue to process these questions. What do you do with the fact that most of our budget and time and energy and calendar and staff are focused on all those things that just had a few hands come up in the room? I feel like that's an interesting conversation that goes well beyond just this class this morning. So the question's been posed. The conversation remains for you guys after this weekend is over. Now, I'm told we need to be done by 9:45, and I see people at the door. Do we have time for one more question, or do I need to wrap it up? We can do one more? Okay, we'll do this one quickly, all right? So super fast, here it is. What opinions did or do you have of the church during your teenage years? Again, this is another one that we could unpack for a long time, but let's literally take just about 30 seconds. So somebody in the group just venture something out there. What do you think about the church? And I'm sorry, we ran out of time to fully process these last couple of questions. Had we had time to work through, I think we only had one or two left. The next question was going to be this. You can read it on the screen. You can see kind of where we're going here. I'm setting the stage. The goal is to set the stage. We already had success this morning by the fact that everybody was willing to get up and sit with somebody that you might not know and talk to people from a different generation. It's interesting when you come in and you're a guest in someone else's church family and you look out in the room and you think, is this even going to happen? I'm not sure. I'm looking at some people who are going, this is where I've sat every Sunday for 60 years. Don't tell me to move around. Thank you so much for being willing to engage the exercise. Okay, I know it feels like we're stopping very abruptly for time, but I would ask you this, and I'm just curious. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Show of hands. Was this valuable today, what we did? Who found value in the exercise? Thank you. I know this is not your typical Bible class, whatever, but I'm honored that I get to be a part of something where I get to watch different generations talking and relate to each other about things that matter. That is so cool. So thank you for the invitation. Hope you're sticking around for lunch later. We'll get more into the details about youth ministry specifically and how you can be a part of ministering to our young people. Thank you.